Tihe moriora, no mai, haere mai, ki tēne whare rerehua, or Christchurch Town Hall, or Otutahi. Ko Judith Taylor aho, ko te tumuaki aho o te Kāhui Whaihanga. Ina mana, ina reo, ina ka rangatanga maha. No mai, haere mai, ka mihi ake. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Behold the breath of life. Welcome to this beautiful building belonging to the people of Christchurch. I am Judith Taylor, President of Te Kāhui Whaihanga, New Zealand Institute of Architects. To the speakers, to all the respected people gathered here, welcome, welcome, I acknowledge you. Greetings. Greetings to everyone. Welcome to the 2023 Gold Medal Lecture Series, proudly supported by Aon. It is wonderful to be here. This annual series offers the public an opportunity to better understand the importance of architecture in Aotearoa, New Zealand. In March this year, I had the pleasure of hosting the 2023 Gold Medal event, where we celebrated our recipient, Professor Deidre Brown. The Gold Medal is the highest honour bestowed by the Institute and has been awarded since 1999. Gold Medal recipients make an outstanding contribution to the practice of architecture, which is demonstrated through a consistently high body of work over a period of time. Deirdre's profound and enduring impact extends to individuals, communities, and our collective well-being. Before we hear from Deidre, I would like to quote from the book written in her honour. In 2019, Deirdre's appointment as head of Te Pare School of Architecture and Planning at the University of Auckland made her the first Indigenous woman in the world to hold such a position. It also marked 30 years since Deidre of Ngāpuhi Ngāti Kāhui began studying architecture at the school. Throughout her impressive career, Deirdre's influence has become so far-reaching that it is almost impossible to define. In academia alone, she has taught and mentored hundreds of students, her guidance shaping architects and urban planners of the future. Deirdre's contribution to architecture is about working with people to enhance their hauora, well-being. It is about creating culturally responsive and responsible architecture. Awarding this gold medal honours the full extent of how architecture is recognised and understood. It also pays homage to a wahine, a mana wahine toa, who has carved a career that embodies the spirit of te tiriti o Waitangi, of partnership between Māori and Pākehā. At a time of transformation in our country, this award is timely. Welcome, Deidre. We're looking forward to your gold medal address.
I te whare I tūnei tēnā koe, ki te papa a tākoto rā tēnā koe. Kia koutou ngā iwi o ngaitahu te mana whenua kei te mihi. I ngā mate, haere haere, haere rā. I ngā mana, i ngā reo, i ngā iwi o tomotu. Tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Ko mātātua te waka, ko ngāpuhi te iwi, ko Ngāti Rehia te hapu, ko mangaiti te marae, ko Deidre Brown taku ingoa. Thank you so much, Judith, for your welcome and your kind kupu. It is a great pleasure to be in Christchurch in the Canterbury branch of the Kāhui Whaihanga, New Zealand Institute of Architects this afternoon. My connections to Christchurch are long-standing and deep. My great-grandparents on my Pākehā side immigrated from the United Kingdom to Christchurch in the late 19th century, and my great-grandfather later built part of the Christchurch Cathedral spire. And as many of you will know, I taught art history at the University of Canterbury between 1998 and 2003, and it's so wonderful to see so many former colleagues and friends from that time here today. Thank you so much for coming. I would sincerely like to thank the sponsor, Aon, and the Institute for this opportunity to speak as part of the Regional Awards round, and to acknowledge my and my whānau's deep appreciation for the tohu of the gold medal, which places me in a whakapapa of earlier recipients, many of whom I know or have known, and all I greatly admire and respect. Sir Miles Warren, the 2000 gold medalist, designed this building as Warren and Māori Architects, a breakthrough project for that practice. Working with the Institute on the Gold Medal book and video has required much reflection on a career to date, remembering the many people who have assisted me and my mahi, and the recognition of Māori architecture in history, practice, and education. While I was engaged in those activities, I was also contemplating, or completing, I should say, Toi Te Mana, a 12-year research project on the history of Māori art and architecture, written with Associate Professor Ngārino Alice and the late Professor Jonathan Mane-Fioki, a friend to many of us here today. He also taught at Canterbury for many years. And this book will be published by Auckland University Press in November. One of the goals of the book is to situate Māori creative practice alongside the other great art traditions of the world. Out of this project, I realised that the time has come to recognise contemporary Māori architecture as no longer the emerging discipline it was when I published Māori Architecture 15 years ago. Contemporary Māori architecture is a rapidly evolving and growing practice, addressing the needs of communities and gaining much attention. It has been at the forefront of regional and national architecture awards and the contribution of Indigenous practitioners and educators recognised internationally. The Ghanaian academic Leslie Loko and I have both received gold medals from our respective institutes of architects this year. Leslie's one is from Reba. The Pritzker Prize has recently recognised the lifetime work of Indian and African architects, while the Aga Khan Awards for Architecture, since their inception, have acknowledged the contribution of designers from Southeast Asia. Oliver Wainwright, Guardian journalist and this year's In Situ keynote speaker, declared in a recent column that, quote, a new wave of Indigenous architects are making their mark, unquote, in Aotearoa, New Zealand. This is not necessarily new news to clients, communities and practitioners here. John Scott received the inaugural gold medal in 1999, and 2 documentary series have been made on Māori architecture, presented by Māori architectural graduates. This heightened visibility is due to new opportunities in Māori society and its economy, mana whenua engagement in public design, and an awareness of indigeneity in education and practice. Indeed, so much has been achieved, I would argue, that contemporary Māori architecture can be recognised as its own movement. It has all the key factors associated with a movement: identifiable establishment moments, continued momentum, education pathways, practitioners, and specific and distinct design characteristics and approaches. From a Ta'ao Māori perspective, it also represents a new direction, inclusive of customary practice, has pioneering kaumātua figures who have been a source of inspiration for those following them, and can be accommodated within the tikanga-based values of Māori society. This presentation is about how we might understand contemporary Māori architecture, taking all of these factors into account. Who is identified as the founding kaumātua figures of contemporary Māori architecture depends on how contemporary Māori architecture is defined. Does it refer only to those trained in Western tertiary institutions, or to a range of people working in a particular period of time? Since the end of the Second World War, there has been a growing body of Māori architects and architectural designers trained in architecture schools rather than the wānanga schools of learning of their ancestors, and sometimes navigating two design worlds, one te ao Māori and the other arising from the Western tradition. The first Māori architect was likely William Bloomfield of Ngāti Kahungunu, who graduated from the University of Pennsylvania in 1913, served as a captain of the Royal Flying Corps 57 Squadron during World War I, and then practiced in Auckland between 1925 and 1959, designing Hotel Titirangi, later known as Lopdale House, among other notable buildings. His portfolio demonstrates a progressive shift from the arts and crafts style to modernism, in keeping with the time span of his career. There is no evidence to date that he worked on any specifically Māori projects or had any Māori clients, although Heritage New Zealand notes that the interior of one of his Auckland buildings, Station House, has, quote, Art Deco plaster capitals with unmistakable Māori cultural references, unquote. A year after Bloomfield retired, the next Māori architect, William Tuarau Royal of Ngāti Raukawa, graduated with a diploma from the University of Auckland. Royal had begun his studies in 1950 and was aware of John Scott, who was some years ahead of him in the program. During admission to the university, Royal was told architecture was not a discipline for Māori. He nevertheless joined, commenting later that, "From day one, I had to succeed because I was a guinea pig for Māoridom. I couldn't afford to let the race down." Royal's early career at Warren and Māni in Christchurch steeped him in the late modernist tradition, a style evident in the work of his private practice, Royal Associates, founded here in Christchurch in 1968. His son Perry Royal later joined him as a director. Among their portfolio of residential, commercial and institutional projects are more than 60 marae. John Scott of Taranaki and Te Arawa is credited for bringing regionalist and indigenous approaches into modernist practice. More than 30 years after his passing, we are still discussing and discovering the depth of his design thinking, particularly as it relates to Māori concepts like whenua and taio, or cultural landscapes and environments, manaakitanga through the provision of generous spaces of welcome and engagement, and the po, or anchoring column, the subject of a documentary about Scott made for the Single Object series and available online. Having undertaken research on Māori and modernism in the visual arts, I feel that there is more work to be done in centering Scott and Royal within the story of a Māori modernism that includes others such as Fred Graham, Frida Kāwhuru, Paratene Matchett, Elizabeth Mountain Ellis, Cliff Whiting, Kath Brown and Pauline Yearbury, to name a few. They were groundbreaking in terms of their education and work, which challenged Māori and non-Māori assumptions about what it was to be an Indigenous practitioner of a contemporary creative practice. Although described as a modernist in Jeremy Hansen and Jade Kāke's excellent publication, Riwi Thompson's approach, I would argue, was more akin to an Indigenous postmodernism, whereas a modernist like Scott was concerned with emphasising the functionality of elements like po, pai, and gabled roofs. Thompson was additionally interested in tikanga and the symbolic meanings of Māori design. Having the privilege of experiencing his thinking close up when we taught together, it became abundantly clear that he used pūrākau, the legendary stories of landscapes, animals and people, as design drivers, which sets his practice apart from modernism. We can see this philosophy expressed in the undulating maunga-like forms of the 1986 Wiri State Housing Precinct, the Polynesian fish canopies from 1987 enlivening the otherwise bland Otara Town Centre shopping mall, and of course his own 1985 home in Kohimarama, Auckland, with its distinctive facade based on the potama pattern used in tānako and tukutuku. Many pūrākau about Māori cultural landscapes operate on a supernatural scale. One of the reasons why Royal Associates designed the Ngā Kete Wānanga building at Manukau Institute of Technology's Otara campus in the shape of a mātou or fish hook, and we can see an aerial view here, was to metaphorically catch Thompson's fish canopy at the nearby Otara shopping centre. Terry Inslee of Te Whānau o Apanui is the first Māori woman registered architect and likely the first Māori woman to receive a degree in architecture, which she obtained in 1980. She was also raised in a reo-speaking environment that was also tikanga-based with her whānau. Throughout her career, Inslee has worked in all stages of design across a wide variety of projects, including cultural, commercial, educational, civic and medical buildings. Always a trailblazer, at Warren and Māori she became an associate and eventually the company's tikanga Māori architect. Indeed, practice leadership is an emerging trend amongst the more than 50 wahine Māori architects and architectural graduates. Elisabetta Heta and Raukura Ture are principals at Jasmax and Monk Mackenzie respectively, and Jade Kāhui is a founder and director of Matakohi Architecture and Urbanism, which has offices in Whangarei and Auckland. The increase in Māori graduates who have been raised with and educated in Te Reo Māori is increasing and will transform contemporary Māori architecture and community relationships in the future. Furthermore, larger architectural practices are employing Māori architectural graduates and architects in teams dedicated to lead and advise on Māori cultural values in project work and in the culture of the organisations themselves. The most well-known of these teams are Wakamaya at Jasmax and Te Matakiria at Warren and Māori. Defining the practice of contemporary Māori architecture to include a wider pool of building designers, not just those trained in architecture schools, provides space for earlier founding kaumātua and architecture. In this scenario, the contemporary period starts earlier with the sometimes competing and diverse architectural programs that emerged after the First World War. The Tūranga Waiwai carving school and housing schemes of the Kingitanga's Te Puia Hirangi, the Romanesque-style churches and Spanish mission-style administration centres of Tahu Pōtiki Wiremu Ratana's eponymous church, and the Wharenui Wharekai churches and exhibition buildings of the School of Māori Arts and Crafts, founded by Sir Apirana Ngata in 1926. And this is the training organisation that was the forerunner to the current Te Puia New Zealand Māori Arts and Crafts Institute. Inclusion of these figures as founding kaumātua makes any definition of a contemporary Māori architecture movement inclusive of tohunga or customary experts, as well as community-trained arts practitioners. The three leaders of these early 20th century movements were social reformers who held tight to Māori ways of doing things in the changing economic and political world of their times. The continuing relevance of their building programs became highly apparent earlier this year when the Huia Tamotu call for Māori unity was hosted in spaces and buildings instigated by each of these leaders. The cultural and political architectural infrastructure laid down by Te Puia, Ratana and Ngata is just as useful and relevant for us now as it was a century ago when it was built. The contemporary Māori architecture movement has a shared design ethos that includes providing space for kawa and tikanga, the protocols of Māori society, identified through co-design processes or the inclusion of a Māori specialist who can be an architect, tohunga or community kaumātua. Contemporary Māori architecture could be defined as buildings made for, by, or with Māori that include significant Māori design aspects or techniques. As Jade Kāhui and Ro Hoskins note, there is no Māori design without mana whenua involvement. As the sesquicentennial of the 1840 Te Tiriti o Waitangi and Treaty of Waitangi signing approached, the catch-all term bicultural design was coined to describe a conceptual or partnered approach to design. Whether bicultural design should be considered included in or separate to contemporary Māori architecture still needs to be debated. The most notable bicultural buildings were initially large public institutions, following briefs requiring the demonstration of Māori and non-Māori historical, social, and political relationships. The design was inspired by the re-evaluation of the meaning of Te Tiriti, particularly in the light of Waitangi Tribunal findings. Central and local government decision-makers began to consider how co-partnership and co-management could be demonstrated through their new buildings, and this flowed through to the design processes used by architectural practices. The most significant commission from this time and of this type was Wellington's Museum of New Zealand Te Papa Tongarewa, designed by Jas Max and opened in 1998. The approach was representational without being derivative. In other words, a volume of space was identified as Māori without sampling patterns and designs. As many of you will remember, the sesquicentennial had also prompted much debate about the appropriation of Māori artistic devices by non-Māori modernist artists, including Gordon Walters, Colin McCann, and Teo Schoon. Architects and their clients wanted to use design approaches that had cultural integrity. For the Te Papa project, a partnership principle was demonstrated through a cleft in the plan, and you can get a sense of this looking down at the roof here, that was initially described as distinguishing the Māori and non-Māori sides of the exhibition spaces. Distinct cultural perspectives of landscape were represented through orthogonal planning, referencing Wellington's city grid, and access to the water to enable waka to approach the building ceremonially. A separate entry was provided to take manuhiri to Rongomorai Roa, Te Papa's marae and its wharenui Tohono ki Hawaii, designed by the artist and museum's Kaihotu Māori director, Cliff Whiting. Pukeariki Museum and Library was another large-scale project designed on bicultural principles by Boone Goldsmith Bhaskar Brebner team architects and opened in 2003. The concept was similarly representational and responsive to the site, in this case across from the ocean and elevated to reinstate the form of the Pukeariki, a hill where a number of chiefs had been buried until it was levelled as part of the town's development. Direct references to Māori architecture and art included the roof of the Taonga Māori Gallery and a woven wall. At the opposite end of the design spectrum to the expressed biculturalism of Te Papa and Pukeariki was a type of functional biculturalism appearing from the late 20th centuries in hospitals, mental health facilities, and correctional facilities. Here the focus was on accommodating Māori and Pacific client needs to improve well-being and rehabilitation outcomes by providing pōwhiri and mihi whakatau spaces for formal Māori welcoming ceremonies, as well as whānau and kaumātua rooms within otherwise Western institutional complexes. The 1988 Mason Report and follow-up inquiries and Mason Jury's work on Māori health and well-being were important influences on the clients and lead architects who commissioned Māori consultant architects such as Riwi Thompson to advise on the best cultural practice. Within tight budgets, the focus was on the provision of useful space, sometimes marked by the inclusion of Māori art rather than a demonstration of high architecture. Shown here is Rangipapa, the Poriruam Hospital Mental Health Unit, marae, designed by Worley Architects and opened in 2001. Emerging in parallel to the expressive and functional biculturalism of public buildings were resolutely Māori educational buildings situated within primary, secondary and tertiary campuses, designed using tikanga Māori concepts. The buildings shown here are Smith Architects and Ngāte Hine Health Trust's Te Mirumiru Early Childhood Education Centre, opened in Kawakawa in 2012. The building's formalism recalls the birth of the iwi's founding ancestress, Hini Amaru, and the relationship that the tangata whenua have as people of the land. Marae containing an ātia open-air forum backed by a wharenui and often adjacent to a wharekai communal dining hall first appeared at universities in the 1980s. By the 1990s, new Māori education buildings on university campuses were the products of long and extensive community and staff design co-design processes. The building team was led by or included a Māori architect or tohunga, from which emerged a building or complex of buildings that either spatially combined cultural and academic functions or separated them into wharenui with administration and teaching wings. Many of the early buildings of this type were designed by Royal Associates. Shown here is Te Mātauranga Māori at Christchurch Polytechnic, now known as Te Puna Wānaka at Te Ara, opened in 1994. It was designed to represent Te Whaihanga, the creation of the world through the separation of the primeval parents, Ranginui and Papatuanuku. The Pūtahia Toi at Massey University's Palmerston North campus, opened in 1997, had a purposeful, cloaking, nurturing form. The Akatoki Māori Student Centre, planned on the form of a manaia, opened in 1998 at the University of Canterbury. And the following year, Ngā Kite Wānanga at Manukau Institute of Technology, designed as a mātou, as I mentioned before, wrapped around a wharenui carved under the supervision of Pakariki Harrison. Harrison also led and supervised the Tāne Nuiarangi Wharenui project at the University of Auckland, opened in 1988, which sits next door to the Rehutai block of staff offices and teaching spaces designed by JASMAX under the leadership of Ivan Mersep. Mersep became acquainted with marae buildings when he toured the East Coast with the renowned tohunga whakairo or master carver, Pine Taiapa, who had been a lead tutor at the School of Māori Arts and Crafts, thus continuing a whakapapa. Pukenga, a Māori studies building designed for Unitec by Southcombe McLean & Co. Associates and Riwi Thompson, opened in 1993 and won the 2021 Te Kāhui Whaihanga New Zealand Institute of Architects Enduring Architecture Award. Two more recent substantial projects on tertiary campuses are Te Raukaramu Marae at Massey University's Wellington campus, designed by Athfield Architects, and Te Kāhui Toi, and opened in 2021. And the Pā, opened at Whare Wānanga or Waikato, University of Waikato, a collaboration between Architectus, JASMAX, Design Tribe with Waikato Tainui. These later projects benefit from having a strong design collaboration with Māori, a creative team for the Massey project and mana whenua for the Waikato complex. The projects are seen as enabling Te Tiriti partnerships and also a recognition of the fundamental changes in higher education and kaupapa Māori approaches that have occurred since the 1999 publication of Linda Tuhiwai-Smith's globally influential book, Decolonising Methodologies. A significant shift occurred in Māori education with the establishment of wānanga degree-bearing institutions in the 1980s, and in the past 20 years a number of Māori and non-Māori-led practices have built new or retrofitted wānanga campus buildings to accommodate a range of disciplines. The example shown here is a Design Tribe's 2013 Library, IT Commons, Teaching Space, Noho Centre and Registry for Te Whare Wānanga o Awanuiarangi in Whakatāne, opened in 2013. The design of contemporary architectural projects initiated by Māori communities needs to be considered separately to projects commissioned by non-community organisations. Māori-initiated projects are expressions of self-determination and are distinguished by their far-reaching co-design approaches, tikanga-based processes, community identity, and response to taiao and environmental conditions and concerns. While design approaches may be similar, design outcomes are varied, reflecting the great breadth of buildings for community and investment purposes. They do not always involve Māori-led architectural practices. An early example are the plans completed in 1974 by Gordon Smith for the Te Rāwhiti Marae complex in the Bay of Islands. Others are Māori-led, like the Korako Whānau Papakainga by Royal Associates, which you can see here, completed at Rāpaki last year, which some of you may have visited as part of Open Christchurch on the weekend. Some iwi, such as Waikato Tainui, Ngāti Whātua, Ngāti Toa and Ngaitahu, and Māori trusts, have strong engagement with architectural practices for their extensive community and property portfolios in hospitality, healthcare, commercial, educational, and residential sectors, with profits reinvested into iwi development. The rise of the Māori civil rights movement in the 1970s was the genesis of a second Māori architectural renaissance that led to a renewed interest in marae in revitalising or building new wharenui. This renaissance took inspiration from consciousness-raising and protest actions in North America, among African Americans through the work of Martin Luther King, Malcolm X and the Black Panther Party, and also the First Nations and Native American activism of the 1972 Trail of Broken Treaties caravan. They laid the foundation for similar Māori direct action organisations such as Ngā Tamatoa, which promoted land and language retention and recovery. Two important turning points in architecture arising from this context were the 1975 Te Rūpū Matakite Hikoi led by Whina Cooper, seen here addressing the Takapū Wāhia Marae in Porirua during the Hikoi, and the 507 days of resistance to government-forced removal of Ngāti Whātua from Takaparawhau between 1977 and 1978. Each means of protest underlined the contemporary politically engaged importance of marae and their buildings. One, a march stopping at marae throughout the North Island to garner support, and the other, a concerted attempt to retain land based around a specifically constructed marae. Today, marae and their architecture are regarded as the last bastions of tikanga in Te Reo. There are over 800 community-based marae, 30 or so in the South Island, 2 on the Chatham Islands and the rest in the North Island, half of which were built after the Second World War, even though the majority of the Māori population was moving from rural to urban areas at this time. The Puia Memorial Marae seen here was the first urban marae to include a whare whakairo, or fully decorated meeting house. It opened in Mangere in South Auckland in 1965 to support whānau from the Waikato Tainui Tribal Confederation, who identified as mana whenua traditional owners of this region, and whānau from other iwi resident in the area. For several months in 2016, as many of you will be aware, the marae attracted national and international attention for sheltering and feeding predominantly Māori and Pacific whānau and individuals made houseless by Auckland's rental and freehold housing shortage. The marae as a setting for resilience, refuge and manaakitanga, or the demonstration of hospitality and kindness, has certainly been evident in recent years, as marae across the motu have provided temporary accommodation to people displaced by earthquakes and flooding, and distribution centres for food and household necessities during the COVID pandemic. From this time, more urban marae have opened for Māori communities based on residential location and sometimes whakapapa descent relationships. Te Mauhurihuri in Auckland's Point Chevalier, Arai Te Uru Marae in Dunedin's Kaikorai Valley, Papetea Marae in Wellington Central, and Hoane Waititi Marae in West Auckland, which was a collaboration between JazzMad, as JazzMax was then known, and Pakariki Harrison. In 1990, a national marae, Ngā Haue Whā, was opened in Christchurch. Today, within the Tāmaki or Greater Auckland region alone, there are 18 mana whenua marae for communities with ancestral territorial rights in the region, 20 taura haere and mātāwaka marae, established by translocated groups or people from different iwi living in the same area, and 33 marae founded by schools, tertiary institutions, churches, the armed forces, prison services, and health services. Each of these marae and their architecture perform important services in upholding the hauora, or well-being, and mana of communities. Alongside wharenui and wharekai, which are often multi-use facilities, many have kohanga reo language nests. The architecture of marae is always evolving and extending. As shown here, a new architectural language based on ancestral concepts was developed by upper architects in collaboration with Tanatana Marae at Waimana for their whare mate to farewell those who have passed on. Toa Architects Taumata o Kupe building, co-designed with the Te Mahurihuri Marae community in 2022 and shown here, was conceived as a forum for the transmission of Māori oral knowledge, particularly that which pertains to the legendary Polynesian navigator Kupe. And for those of you who know my husband Grant, he was also one of the architects on this team. Over the past 10 years, Ngai Tūhoi have pursued an innovative building program on its tribal lands, beginning with Te Kura Whare, a tribal governance and community centre designed by Tūhoi and JazzMax, under the leadership of Ivan Mursep, and opened at Taneatua in 2014. Kaitiakitanga, a practice of caring for the land, led to a decision to design according to the Living Building Challenge performance criteria. Tūhoi also required of its architects and building contractors that community members should be active participants in all parts of the project. The 2016 demolition of the John Scott-designed Aniwa Visitors Centre opened in 1976, due to high remediation and restoration costs, revealed the tensions between the self-determined architectural future envisaged by Tūhoi for the larger Te Urewera National Park site and an earlier form of bicultural architecture built by the Crown, which did not meet the future aspirations of the tribe. Tūhoi instead invested in the opening of a new visitors centre designed in 2016, Te Wharehau o Waikare Moana, built elsewhere in the national park. Designed with Tenant Brown, the building carried forward and revised Mursep's initial spatial planning, Living Building Challenge requirements, and the co-design method developed for Te Kura Whare. Fundamentally a place to express manaakitanga, the design also took inspiration from the local natural environment and tikanga. The geomorphology of sandstone slabs, the lake basin, and burnt timber cladding to express the occupational fires of ahika, fires of belonging. The same year, Tūhoi's Te Kura Whare opened in Auckland, Ngāti Whātua o Rākei moved 30 families into a papakainga of terraced housing designed in collaboration with Stevens Lawson's architects. As the name suggests, Kainga Tuhatahi was the first stage of a master plan to repatriate Ngāti Whātua to their whenua, a 16-hectare site regarded by 3,000 tribal members as their tūranga waiwai or place of belonging. The angular planes of the roofs unite several terraces and are a reference to Auckland's volcanic landscape, their forms recalling Riwi Thompson's use of undulating roofs for his Wiri State House project. Since Kainga Tuatahi, Ngāti Whātua and JazzMax developed the design for Kainga Kaumātua that was realised by G.J. Gardner in 2021, and the Hawaii terraced housing development for families that is still under construction. One criticism of the design of these 3 developments is that, at face value, they are little different to medium to high density developments seen elsewhere in the city. However, they reflect the needs and the aspirations of their communities who received what they wanted through these designs. Sustainable living, shared outdoor spaces that connect to the wider cultural landscape, long lifespan materials and innovative financing processes are hallmarks of these Ngāti Whātua and many other Papakainga developments. The greatest need in contemporary Māori architecture is the provision of housing. Aotearoa New Zealand's housing crisis disproportionately affects Māori communities. Known issues are low housing and land supply, building and rental unaffordability, poor proximity to work and education, crowding, substandard construction, uninhabitability, and the often permanently disabling health effects of all of these factors. Māori home ownership rates are 31% compared with 58% for the Pākehā population. Māori comprise 36% of public housing tenants and are 5 times more likely to be houseless than Pākehā. 20% of Māori live in crowded homes. These long-standing issues have necessitated a Waitangi Tribunal hearing into housing policy and services and Human Rights Commission inquiry into housing. Last year, in response to these issues, I and 20 other Māori and Pacific researchers from all of the University of Auckland's faculties established Māpihi, Māori and Pacific Housing Research Centre. Māpihi is a university-level research centre committed to providing research that will assist communities, NGOs, community housing providers, local and central government, and architectural practitioners and other professionals increase the quality and supply of housing for Māori and Pacific people. Our ideation with these groups determined that while there is a strong drive to increase housing, there is an insufficient evidence base for what good architecture is for our communities living in rural and increasingly densified urban settings. And one of the motivations for this was just thinking what an incredible talent pool we have within the university and such a significant need out in the community and us coming together and thinking about how we could assist. Māpihi's first 3 Aotearoa New Zealand project priorities, co-developed with our stakeholders at the 2023 hui shown here, are a self-determined Māori and Pacific residential building and design industry, the wellbeing intensification nexus for Māori and Pacific communities, and an accessible information platform for successful Papakainga and Pacific-led housing initiatives. Only through research and educating practitioners and the public will the understanding and visibility of contemporary Māori architecture increase. A reduced pipeline of Māori entering architectural education can be attributed to a legacy of high and complex admission requirements to enter architecture programs, which has effectively locked Māori out of participating in the profession. This is an outcome of urbanisation, which has weakened connections to marae and cultural identities, the enduring social and economic legacies of colonisation that make a career in architecture seemingly or actually out of reach, and the professionalisation of the building industry, which closed the door on community and self-building. Universities and Te Pūkenga have responded by adjusting admissions criteria and curriculum. This year, AUT Te Wānanga Aronui o Tamaki Makaurau removed its portfolio and GPA requirements, meaning any student with university entrance could study architecture, and this led to an incredible intake of 260 students. It also has a curriculum based on the Te Aranga principles. The Wellington School of Architecture, Te Kura Whaihanga, has a Māori Design and Environment specialisation stream within its Bachelor of Architectural Studies. Te Pare School of Architecture and Planning uses its University of Auckland targeted admission scheme to admit more Māori students. And Te Pūkenga takes a holistic view of student achievements and motivation through its admission interview process. Curriculums are being decolonised and indigenised through internal and external processes the latter including several Indigenous criteria in the Australian National Standard for Competency for Architects, against which all New Zealand professional Master of Architecture programs are accredited. Tertiary providers are also increasing their Māori permanent staff, particularly at the most senior levels. In 2019, I became the first Māori Professor of Architecture. In 2022, Professor Anthony Horty joined me at Auckland, and he won an award at the Tauranga Branch Awards last week. And as of last year, Derek Kawati and Rod Barnett became professors at the Wellington School. Fleur Palmer and Amanda Yates are associate professors at AUT. A Māori-focused architectural curriculum was first proposed 7 decades ago. Wirramoi Royal was still in the architecture program at Auckland when, in 1957, the educator, anthropologist and broadcaster Maharaira Winiata wrote into Auhau, "Perhaps the best place for the advanced study of Māori arts and crafts is in the suggested School of Design projected for Auckland. One can visualise students, both Māori and Pākehā, making an intensive study of Māori art and working out ways and means of assisting in the construction of contemporary types of carved meeting house, as well as suggesting adaptations of the art for use in private and public buildings. Probably slowness in the integration of Māori art into the New Zealand cultural life is due as much to the absence of a body of Māori specialists organised for propaganda purposes as to anything else." Winiata's comments about an architectural curriculum founded on Māori principles echoed what was happening at the same time in the secondary school curriculum through the establishment of the Department of Education's Māori Arts Advisory Service and the Māori Arts Curriculum. It was the Māori arts advisors, many of whom had degrees and diplomas in art from tertiary institutions, who became the vanguard in the transformation of marae and public buildings and public spaces in the late 20th century, and not Māori architects who have always been much fewer in number. We can see this in notable works by Cliff Whiting, Paratene Matchett and Kath Brown, and also later practitioners including Bob Yonker, Shane Cotton, Michael Parakowhai, Graham Tipene and Lonnie Hutchinson, whose Kāhui Mataurau work on the Christchurch Justice and Emergency Precinct is shown here. And thank you, Lonnie, for attending today. It's wonderful to see you. Architectural artist interventions, usually in the form of murals or sculpted wall works on buildings, are often co-created with communities and sometimes architects and urban designers. As spaces enlivened and contextualised by art, they are different in nature to the total concept designs produced by architects working from a tikanga Māori perspective. Christchurch has an especially strong tradition of Māori architectural and urban design interventions. For example, Darren George's Lamb's Book of Life from 2011, which was one of the largest temporary gap filler projects of this time, and I think someone might want to correct me if I'm wrong, was also a Scape project. And Rachel Rakena and Simon Khan's 2021 Te Aika permanent entranceway at the Te Pai Christchurch Convention Centre, produced by Scape Public Art in collaboration with Matapōpōrere. Matapōpōrere articulates the mana whenua voice in the Christchurch recovery. Educating architects to feel confident about engaging with tikanga has been a long and continuing journey for those working in architectural education. Gerhard Rosenberg taught Māori architecture through his appointments in architecture and then urban planning at the University of Auckland. From the late 1920s until his retirement in 1977, he was highly active in the field of Māori housing, undertaking and publishing research and advocating for changes in planning legislation. He produced a set of Māori housing plans with Don McRae, one of which was built in Auckland. Their open plan internal spaces, multiple adaptable bedrooms, connections to outdoors and places for hosting were then a radical alternative to the nuclear family homes promoted by the Ministry of Māori Affairs. Rosenberg supervised Mike Austin's 1976 PhD thesis, Polynesian Architecture in New Zealand, a document regarded as providing the validation and content knowledge for the teaching of Pacific, including Māori architecture in tertiary institutions. The image shown here is from 2018 and shows the first architecture crit held in Te Reo Māori for a Master of Architectural Professional thesis, written completely into Ao Māori by my student Mataki Tātahi Rawiri MacDonald, who is the son of Teri Inslee, the first Māori woman architect. Tony Watkins of Te Rarawa is currently researching the career of the first Māori permanent academic in architecture, Harold Paitu Wallace from Te Rarawa, who was also the first Māori civil engineer. Wallace taught structures at the University of Auckland School of Architecture between 1960 and 1972. Tony himself was the next Māori appointment, teaching part-time between 1986 and 2004, overlapping with Mike Barnes of Tu Whare Toa, who specifically taught Māori architecture for 7 years. Barnes's contribution, combined with Riwi Thompson's studio teaching, Tony Ward's community architecture, Tony Watkins' vernacular architecture courses, and Mike Lindsay, Mike Austin, and Sarah Treadwell's historical research, provided a body of people and knowledge that led to the founding of Whaihanga, the inaugural Māori architecture student support group in the early 1990s, and this is the momentum and continuation that I was talking about before. Emerging from the Whaihanga context and outside of the university, Hoskins and colleagues established Design Tribe in 1994, which celebrates its 30th anniversary this year. Some other Māori-led architectural practices founded since then include Toa Architects, directed by Nicholas Dalton, Matakohi Architecture and Urbanism, founded by Jade Kāhui, Arco, co-founded by Anna Hirimaya, and Orua, established by Mataki Tātahi Rawiri MacDonald, Mā Tangirea Yates Francis, and Renee Smith Apanui. Our incoming Te Kāhui Whaihanga New Zealand Institute of Architects president is Huia Rereti of Ngaitahu, an accomplished architect. Yet, as Professor Anthony Huate notes in a recent Architecture New Zealand article, the number of Māori graduates is small, and that of Māori architects even smaller, at just 68 registered, or 3% of the total number of registered architects. Nevertheless, Māori architectural graduates and Māori-led architectural practices have found strength in combining forces with Māori and other design disciplines to activate meaningful change based on Māori principles and precedents. The influential Ngā Aho network of Māori design professionals was an outcome of a 2001 Māori architecture hui at Hoane Waititi Marae. The hui identified the need for a professional body for the commercially oriented creative disciplines of architecture, design, engineering, landscape architecture and planning, as their needs were not being met by Māori visual arts organisations like Ngā Puna Whaihanga, Te Waka Toi and Toi Māori Aotearoa. The call found meaningful purpose as the group took umbrage with the Ministry of the Environment's 2005 Urban Design Protocol and its lack of acknowledgement of the Māori built environment. The group's response to the Urban Design Protocol was the Te Aranga Māori Cultural Landscape Strategy, drafted at Te Aranga Marae in 2006 and circulated around iwi for consultation over the next 2 years, and also the formalisation of Ngā Aho as a representative body. In Auckland, the Te Aranga principles from the document are now part of the Council's design manual. They have been applied and refined on large-scale projects, including the Auckland Manukau Eastern Transport Initiative, the Auckland City Rail Link, and Commercial Bay. The Te Aranga principles will eventually be replaced in the Auckland Design Manual by mana whenua created principles. Ngā Aho also developed the Kawanata o Rata partnership document over a series of hui with the New Zealand Institute of Architects, which was signed by the National Office and its 8 branches in 2017. 2 years later, the Ngā Aho Kaumātua, an eminent broadcaster and educationalist, Sir Hare Williams, gave the institute its Māori name, the Kāhui Whaihanga, meaning a group of people cloaked with the knowledge of building. In my experience, when there is a critical mass of Māori educators, graduates and professionals, the dialogue around a contemporary Māori architecture shifts from the equity and representation space into active and influential action that can be the catalyst for great outcomes, as demonstrated through design, the business of practice, research, and pedagogy. Contemporary Māori architecture is a movement with its own founding kaumātua, specific tikanga-based co-design practices, and unique educational approaches. It has delivered a group of buildings that, while sometimes diverse in appearance, all have Māori programs. Furthermore, it is directed towards supporting and improving the hauora or well-being of people in the whenua. The design of contemporary Māori architecture has come a long way since Te Papa, mainly through involving communities as co-designers and Māori-based formalisms and design languages. Cost is a factor, and not all projects are equally well supported, leading to compromises but also innovative solutions. Sustainability and connection to taiao have become increasingly important. All projects have in common a desire to create spaces where cultural activities can take place, particularly around welcoming, hosting, and accommodating whānau and noho. We are only 16 years away from the bicentenary of Te Tiriti o Waitangi's signing. The sesquicentenary in 1990 inspired a new bicultural architecture. The centenary in 1940 is associated with the flourishing Māori architectural renaissance led by the School of Māori Arts and Crafts, established 14 years before. All these historical indicators suggest that 2040 will be a big year in Aotearoa New Zealand architecture, and especially contemporary Māori architecture, the various defining characteristics of which will likely become the yardsticks measuring how far architecture has come as a profession, practice, and pedagogy over the past 2 centuries. I conclude my gold medal lecture with a challenge set down for all of us by the Ngāpuhi leader, Sir James Hinare. Kua tāwhite ke tō haerenga mai, kia kore e haere tonu. He nui rawa o mahi, kia kore e mahi tonu. You have come too far not to go further. You have done too much not to do more. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Kia ora, thank you.